This video addresses various claims about whether or not Proposition 13 is indeed in need of reform. Is the problem government spending? Yes, California currently is cutting spending. Whether or not the government is overspending on a particular program is always a debate, and there are certainly examples of wasteful spending. However, the California state government underfunds important services. In any event, taxes need to be fair, and Proposition 13 holds unfair tax policies. Is more revenue really needed? Just look at the services that have been cut that are funded by state revenue. Most would agree that these cuts are devastating and that programs and services lost are not a positive outcome. With this view, you must also take into account what must be done to keep services around. Revenue must be increased. Is Prop 13 really what we should blame? Many politicians blame Proposition 13 for our current budget crisis. While there are many factors, Proposition 13 is certainly a key element to address. Of course, there are problems on many different levels, and there are various ways the government could consider better efficiency tactics. But Prop 13 policy, again, is a key problem. We should work to solve social problems on many different levels to achieve results. That includes Proposition 13 reform. Opposing claims often come from the ideologies of opposing political parties. When it comes to taxes, typical Democrats have the tax and spend ideology, and Republicans the cut taxes, cut programs ideology. This is a large debate on its own. Many Republican conservatives might disagree with Prop 13 reform based on a tax is bad grounds. Their warrant for these grounds include backing like keeping taxes low as possible is friendly to business. When businesses make more money, they pay more taxes, create more jobs, and pass on lower prices. However, corporate tax breaks are not a guarantee that the break will result in hiring more employees or keeping prices low. Closing corporate loopholes would certainly not discourage new business from emerging in California. The property tax would not change for new businesses. Businesses affected most by closing corporate tax loopholes would be those that have been established pre-1978 and have avoided any tax increases since then. These established businesses that have avoided reassessment have an enormous advantage over new businesses who pay taxes at a rate adjusted for the inflation that has occurred up until the present time. This makes it more difficult for new businesses to compete. Additionally, businesses who have been around for such a long period are likely to be more stable. The effect of finally requiring a fair tax would not likely have them give up their current stability in California, where their business is already established. Moving out of California would be a lot of work. And consider the alternative to raising revenues. What business would want to stay in a state with poor education, lack of police and fire, lack of parks, and unmaintained roads and bridges? When defending claims for a split roll, it is important to recognize the differences between people and corporations. That will help us understand why there should be differences in their tax laws. A business does not have a fixed income as older people sometimes do. The business can theoretically live and work forever. This means they are also able to adjust to tax increases over time. Government cost of services increase with inflation. How can there be adequate funding if a corporate property tax perpetually lags behind inflation? In my opinion, policy to have split tax rolls and close loopholes must give warning and perhaps be adjusted over time. Although we feel a solution to the problem should occur now, in order to gain concerned voters' approval and make sure new policy has an overall beneficial effect, we must ensure businesses have that time to adjust to new tax rates. Opponents to Prop 13 reform might express that 13 should not be reformed because it has helped keep taxes low for the average Californian. However, reforms proposed for Proposition 13 would not increase homeowners' tax. And in fact, over time, Proposition 13 has led homeowners to share a larger tax burden than businesses in their communities. Additionally, the two-thirds requirement to pass new taxes was so restrictive that the government has been resorting to implementing various fees on the average Californian, using other gimmicks, and relying on borrowing. We still needed more revenue, we just had to get it other ways that weren't constricted. Proposition 13 was intended to provide more certainty and predictability in payments for the average Californian family. However, these days we see some of Proposition 13's effects which completely betray such an aim. Without sufficient revenue, the government has had to make drastic cuts in education spending, which has resulted in massive increases in tuition for college students and their families. Students no longer can make the assumption that they will be able to afford a school based on current tuition rates. And in many cases, students may not be able to continue with their college plans as tuition increases. Or when you're looking at the elderly, which Proposition 13 originally claims to be saving, you can note how the government cuts to health care will affect many of the elderly Californians on Medi-Cal. After recent cuts, they will be paying much higher copays for services that will now limit them to 7 doctor visits per year and fail to provide adult day health centers. If services we need are not being paid for in taxes, they will be paid for another way, and often that means giving higher bills to those who can least afford it. Another claim made against Prop 13 reform is that without the two-thirds requirement, it would become too easy for the majority party, Democrats, to raise taxes at will, causing runaway taxes. It is highly unlikely that a 55% requirement would lead to the majority party just passing tax increases at their will. When President Obama had a majority in the House and Senate, they did not raise taxes at their will, and they only needed a simple majority to pass tax increases. The revenue impact of state legislatures' supermajority voting requirements, a study by Megan M. Jordan and Kim Hoffman, found supermajority requirements to be unnecessary. They concluded that state legislatures innately have political limits within its institutions and procedures that are effective, at least on the issue of raising taxes. Taxes are not popular, neither are spending cuts. Even liberal legislatures do not delight in raising taxes. Scaring the public into believing that the Democratic legislatures of California will use a 55% majority requirement to tax and spend at their will may be an effective political tactic, but the claim is unproven rhetoric.